Hello. Okay, so we're going to look at Acts 8:37 and why not its inclusion in different iterations of the Bible. And I'm going to start by saying, thank you, Jesus, obviously. Also, I'm not a scholar of textual criticism. Like, I've done some of it with theology studies, but I wouldn't say it's the area in which I'm most comfortable. So with that, let's have a look. So I got two sets of notes as well, which may, I don't know, let's just pray. I already have, and see how we go. So I don't know if anybody has heard of Erasmus of Rotterdam, if my memory serves me right. Sorry to any Dutch people if he's not from Rotterdam. I feel confident that anyhow, that's irrelevant. Erasmus, you may have heard him through his letters, I guess in those days, to Luther, Martin Luther, Dr. Luther. They went back and forth for some time on topics ranging from free will to, well, lots of stuff. They tended to disagree quite publicly. So the verse being added to the KJV, I mean, maybe I'll start with okay, let's see. No, I'm going to start where I was with Erasmus. I feel like that's the key, and then we'll go from there. So we're going to see how the verse makes its way into the King James Version, the KJV Bible, which was a 1611, 17th century, obviously post-Reformational work. The 1611 KJV did not translate directly from Greek manuscripts. So that's one clue as to how it differs from other translations into English, certainly. The 1611 KJV is actually a revision of the 1602 Bishop's Bible, which is one number of revisions of Tyndale's. You may have, I hope you've heard of him, Tyndale's 1534 New Testament, which had translated, it gets more complex, which had translated the 1522 edition of the Greek and Latin Diglot of Erasmus of Rotterdam, which was first printed in 1516. Let me see if I can make that less wordy. I don't think I can. But the 1611 KJV is a revision of the 1602 Bishop's Bible. The Bishop's Bible of 1602 is one of a number of revisions of Tyndale's 1534 New Testament, which had and the 1534, Tyndale had translated the 1522 edition of the Greek Latin Diglot of Erasmus. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was first published or printed in those days in 1516. So that was, on the cusp of Reformational Christianity. And that this is like where the crux of it really lied. Luther translated the Bible firstly into German because people's native tongues were not taken into account, and most people did not read the Bible at all, not because they were like slack, just because a lot of people couldn't read, and therefore the priest's role was like discernment of the text and reading in Latin/Greek Hebrew. So the KJV doesn't always follow the Erasmus text. That's pretty key thing to note. And it's more of a eclectic. It's a combination of readings from differing texts. I think James was like sincere in his desire to get what he considered the best reading, as it were. But the KJV form of the text comes from the Greek Latin text of Erasmus, certainly for this section that we're looking at, which is Acts 8:37. So contrasting that, the Complutensian polyglot, so poly meaning more than one, glot meaning tongue, printed in 1514 did not include the verse. So that's only it's 100 or so years before King James, but only a few before Erasmus put forth his translation. As it was not in the commonly used Greek manuscripts, that's manuscripts. That's the reason it wasn't included in Erasmus. So in terms of the history of printed Greek text, which of course it differs greatly, as one would imagine, from handwritten Greek text, there is a longer history of not including it than there is of including it. That's just when we look at printed Greek texts. So yeah, consider that how you will in regards to the claims of it being preserved. So here's Erasmus's 1516 text, the first printed Greek text to add the verse to the text. Erasmus, so Acts 8:37 was the first instance in printed Greek. That's what we know. So he has an annotation explaining with the text, none of it is in any secrecy. That's really important. Like where the verse is missing, there will be footnotes. Some of the footnotes are more gentle than others. Some of them have they beg more questions, as it were, when they use somewhat biased language. But we may or may not come on to that, seeing how progressively uncomfortable I get talking about it. He notes that the verse, consisting of two sections, is not found in the Greek manuscripts. That's a direct quote. But he thinks that the Greek scribes have accidentally left it out, since it is in the Latin Vulgate that he is using as a base. And so he suggests, however, I think the omission was the result of negligent scribes. These are his opinions, of course. He then notes, on the other hand, I did find the reading in a certain Greek manuscript, but only in the margin. So the marginalia, I'm going to go on to explain some of that. He additionally notes in his later editions, in response to criticism, that it's not found in Chrysostom and not in the Spanish edition, although it was added to the Aldine edition, which he does not realise is in fact simply his own 1519 Greek reprinted by other people. So he uses it to back up, to confirm his stuff when it's actually his stuff, but he just not realised that. However, it was in the copy of the Latin Vulgate that Erasmus had. And we even know the exact form of the Vulgate that Erasmus used, since he printed it alongside his own Latin translation and the Greek text in his 1527 edition. So in his edition of the Greek Latin text of Erasmus for Acts, an author called Brown, or a scholar called Brown, I should say, notes this of the verse. Erasmus did not find this verse in his Codex 1 or 2815, but derived the wording from the margin, which he just told us so, of Codex 2816, where he suggests that it was originally omitted by scribal error. Consequently, he inserted a caret mark at the end of verse 36 in Codex 2815, accompanied by a symbol in the margin to indicate that an addition was required. The subject was further discussed in his letter to Lee LB 1X 207 CE. So I'm going to get back to the basics in a minute, I promise. Erasmus added it to his Greek text, not on the basis of any Greek manuscript, because none of the ones he had access to, I'm not saying there are none, but none of the ones he had access to had it in the main body of the text. We're not talking about marginalia at the moment. But he added it on the basis of its presence in the Vulgate, which he felt was vindicated by its presence in the marginalia, like in the notes within a single Greek manuscript, which is minuscule 2816, that he had access to. And the manuscripts that Erasmus had, which has the text in, is, I believe, the one that I used for screen grab. So coming away from all that wordiness, let's just have a look for and against the inclusion. It's not as cut and dry as one might assume, actually. So I think I'm going to start with the argument against, and then I'm going to go the pro, like the argument for authenticity, as it were. It's still a lot of stuff, but let's do this. If I can find the part of my, okay, yeah. So this is the evidence or argument against the authenticity of Acts 8:37. So Bruce Metzger, I don't know if any of you have heard that name. He has this explanation for why the verse is not in the modern Greek textual apparatuses. And I should say now that there's some, not technical, but can't think what the word is. Like notational things used here. I don't know how to pronounce them. I'm just going to read them as I see them, but I will explain what they are. And in fact, I'm going to do that first. Go on, Kay. Thinking on your feet there, love. Right. Let's see what we're using and what the abbreviations are. So question mark 45 is an early Greek manuscript from the 3rd century. So pay attention to the dates, of course. There is no original text to go to. But I guess I've often heard the argument in terms of textual criticism that one wouldn't seek, if you were a counterfeiter, for example, you wouldn't want to use a copy of a fake note. You'd rather have the original note to copy from. So the earlier the evidence, the earlier the manuscript, the more we should look to that to see what's what. And of course, like try and marry it up with as close in time manuscripts as we can. Either way, question mark 45, early Greek manuscript from the 3rd century, circa 250 CE, and it's considered by some as part of the Alexandrian text type. And it's the earliest text type that we have for the New Testament manuscripts, like full stop. It was in an Egyptian style codex that is believed to have been around 220 pages originally, and like only 30 of those exist today. Luckily, a portion of Acts was in these 30 pages, and specifically Acts 4 to 17. And in this manuscript, the earliest one extant, verse 37 does not exist. The Aleph Codex, which also does not include verse 37, is a Greek uncial, I don't know, UNCIAL, written in, it's written in all capitals, that's what that means. And that dates to around 330 to 360 CE, like AD, I guess, is another way to say that, potentially. It's only, like, from the largest and most complete biblical manuscripts that have been found in Greek, the one I'm talking about, the Aleph Codex. It's, in addition to missing Acts 3:37, it also omits Acts 15:34, 24:7, and 28:29 for anyone who's into bingo. Alexandrinus Codex, the AE Codex, it's 5th century, so we're getting progressively later, well, further away from the time of Christ. So it's 400 to 440 CE. So this Greek Codex is also in the Greek uncials. I'm going to go with that, the all capital ones. This also omits Acts 37, 15:34, 24:7, 28:29, same. However, it does include writings from early church fathers, so we'll get on to those, such as Clement and Athanasius. We won't be getting onto those. We'll be getting onto like different church fathers. In addition, it includes a copy of the Septuagint, the Deuterocanonical books like Maccabees, and a few others that modern, as it were, Bibles do not include, and that's across the board. I don't mean like Protestant or Roman Catholic. The Codex Vaticanus, so that's Codex B, is 4th century. That's 300 to 325. It's to be considered one of the oldest Greek New Testament. So like the other uncials, I don't know. It also doesn't include Acts 37, 15:34, 24:7, and 28:29. Among modern biblical scholars who do textual work, not this one, it's regarded as the most accurate witness to the original Greek. And again, doesn't have it there because I'm going through the arguments against first, of course. So that's worth noting. It's also an Alexandrian text type. So Codex C, which is Ephraemi Rescriptus, is 5th century, circa 450 CE, and is unique to manuscripts in that it's been recycled. So the original text, eat your heart out, Greta Thunberg. The original text was in Greek and contained much of the Bible. It was subsequently washed, as it were, and written over again with another text, likely in the 12th century. However, now that we have the technology, as it were, I'm sure that's a slogan from an advertising campaign, we are able to, the original text is not lost forever. Much of it was still decipherable and in good enough condition to apply dating also to the text. And obviously it's come up with circa 450. So we could go on and on and on. There's one, like the earliest attestation to verse 837 is Codex E, which is Codex Laudianus, which is 6th century. So keep that in your mind. 550, circa 550. And that has parallel readings of both Latin and Greek. And it's likely that the manuscript tradition I read from these notes, it followed was the Latin, like not the older Greek. So the Greek used in the Codex is a mixture of various text types. A similar manuscript, multilingual, exists, which includes Acts 837 and goes by the title Codex D, which is Codex Claromontanus. It's also from the 6th century and is also Latin and Greek, the Latin being the primary tradition or the copy. So you remember them. Question mark 45, the Aleph Codex, and then we've got A, B, C, D, basically. So we're going to, that I will be referencing anyhow. So let's just get to the basic argument against the authenticity. So this is what Bruce Metzger, if you remember, an eon ago, I mentioned him. This is what he says this is an appealing explanation why the verse is not in the modern Greek textual apparatuses. So version 37 is a Western edition, or verse even. 37 is a Western edition not found in, right, question mark 45, the Aleph, ABC, 3381613, VD, I don't know, man, SYRP, Coxa, F, all of those things, whatever they are. I looked at some of them. He's saying it's not in any of these anyway. But is read with many minor variations by E. Many minuscules. So remember I mentioned the one minuscule that Erasmus had access to. Yeah, so there are quite a few that contain it. I think it's up in the 600s, but I'll come to that in a moment. So there's no reason why scribes should have omitted the material, i.e. left it out, if it had originally in the text. And it should be noted too that, what is it? Jesus the Christ, I think so. Jesus the Christ is not a Lucan, as it were. It's not the terminology that Luke uses. Obviously, different gospel writers and different writers throughout the Bible have differing ways of describing Jesus Christ. And Jesus the Christ is not typically Luke, and Luke wrote Acts, of course. So there's too much Greek writing here, and I have no idea. So the early church, I see here, in baptismal ceremonies, because of course I should have read the verse first, that would have been handy. It's potentially an explanation for baptism or infant baptism. It's been used as a supporting. So it may have been written in the margin, this is all from Metzger anyway, of a copy of Acts. Its insertion into the actual body of text seems to have been due to the feeling that Philip would not have baptized the Ethiopian, I will read the verse in a minute, without securing a confession of faith, which needed to be expressed within the narrative. So basically, the allusion here is that one of the scribes has stuck it in the margin or written, like as an explanation, not as a deception, not as anything disingenuous, but to make the story flow, because the manuscripts of the time, the earliest being, 3rd century, just did not have it. Although the earliest known New Testament manuscript that contains the words dates from the 6th century, manuscript E, the tradition of the Ethiopians' confession of faith in Christ was current as early as the latter part of the 2nd century, so 100 and such, for Irenaeus, that's who we're going to speak about, quotes it in Against Heresies, or part of it, I should say. Although the passage does not appear in the late medieval manuscript on which Erasmus chiefly depended for his edition, which was manuscript 2, it stands in the margin of another, manuscript 4, from which he inserted it into his text because he, inverted commas, judged that it had been omitted by the carelessness of scribes, which arbitro omissum libra aureum incuria, apparently, if you're Latin. So that comes from that quote that I just butchered, basically, but that came from Bruce Metzger, a textual commentary on the Greek New Testament. So Metzger is regarded by many academics as a kind of godfather of biblical Greek. And, a long-term professor of Princeton, or at Princeton. He was the driving force behind the NRSV translation, which is many denominations use that as their Pew Bible, as it were. His work is regarded as excellent, like second to none. That being said, his logic, like he's not a logician, as it were, and his logic and proofs, like, should be examined. So we're going to have a brief go at that. He says that verse 37 is a Western addition to the text, and that refers to an addition that stems from the Western text type, which contains manuscripts dated as old as the 4th and 5th century. However, this is why I'm not a textual critique. However, the Western text type manuscripts date as recently as the medieval period. That's a massive gap of time. The Western church leaders are some of the most, to us at least, including Tertullian, Cyprian, Irenaeus, Ignatius, Polycarp, yada yada. The Western text types are some of the oldest Alexandrian text types or any writings of the ante-Nicene fathers, i.e. before. However, the Alexandrian text types are dated as old as the 2nd century. The issue with these older Alexandrian manuscripts is that they were altered more frequently than later manuscripts, unlike the Byzantine text types that underlay the majority text of the KJV. All that aside, this cohesiveness of the later manuscripts has less to do with textual tradition and more to do with the advancing technology for writing and the fact that literacy rates just skyrocketed, thankfully. You with me so far? Right. The inconsistencies often in the early manuscripts were due to scribal mistakes. I've said it many times. Every time I've spoken about not discrepancies, that's the wrong word, variations, as it were, in the text. The vast majority are spelling errors, syntax errors, words being in the wrong way, and 0%. Sorry, I'm just looking. Literacy skyrocketed between the 2nd century and the medieval period, certainly, and then onwards after the publication of the Common People's Bibles is what I'm referring to, post-Reformational. Where was I? Yes, this is what I'm talking about. Literacy was very different, let's put it that way then. And the inconsistencies in the early manuscripts were due to scribal errors, that's where I was. Mistakes, footnotes that were added during the copying for some reason, because there was no delete button, that kind of thing. And when manuscripts from the early text types have verses omitted, it's usually assumed that the original did not include the passage because the scribe has little interest or little benefit in altering. Like it's just a straight copy out saga, as it were. However, it is more likely that a scribe would add rather than subtract, if that makes it, like add to as an explanatory thing or a footnote, as opposed to leaving something out entirely. The typical way that a footnote becomes a textual variant happens in 3 stages. The first, pretty obvious, the scribe adds a note next to a block of text for clarification from his line manager. I don't really know what the setup is. Later copyists assume it was accidentally left out, like it's in the sidebar there. So, I wonder if I should stick it in, and it gets added in line in the body of the text. And then even later copyists start copying and multiplying the altered manuscript. So you see the analogy of trying to go back to the original banknote, or at least the best, the most authentic copy, which should be earlier, because as more time passes with no disingenuousness, Chinese whispers kind of thing can be used. Right, so Acts 8:37 is an example. It once only existed as marginalia. That's that, in terms of the earliest. And it is fairly easy to do, and it could be accidental, but this is how Metzger is, that's his view of 837. It doesn't appear in the earliest manuscripts, even if the church fathers believed it was part of the story, which certainly 2 of them did. Cyprian was the other one. So even if yeah, so they believed it, an oral tradition, certainly, which does predate the written, but we'll come to that. So in even later manuscripts, the verse is more consistent. The manuscripts where it does not appear are listed by Metzger as these. Verse 37, he says, is a Western edition not found in, again, question mark 45, Aleph, ABC, 33, 81, 64, VG, SYRP, don't know what that is, COPSA, and F. And they're all in lowercase, so I don't think they're acronyms. So I've explained what those things were. So it's not found in them, but it is found in Codex E, which is 6th century again, and Codex D, Claromontanus, which is also 6th century. Other witnesses to the existence of Acts 837, we're still talking about the written, we're not talking about oral tradition at the moment, are from much later manuscripts from the 9th century. So that's like, we're getting way out there now, and beyond that later. So at this point, like most textual critics would agree that the readings from the old manuscripts would more accurately represent the originals. It's the banknote thing again. So in that case, it's especially true since there is a visible progression through time that shows this verse appearing, as it were, in manuscripts only as they become later in date, i.e. 6th century. And then inconsistently copied until the medieval period, because just because there's a verse in there doesn't mean they're all worded the same either. In cases like these, like it's easy to assume, at least according to Metzger, that the verse was an addition. And Metzger also points out that Jesus the Christ is not an expression that Luke uses at all. And that's not utterly fair, or technically it is true. And I'm going to tell you how Luke does address or like describe Jesus. But as far as Metzger's, like it is broadly true what he's saying, it is out of character for Luke to use that. All the New Testament writers obviously have their own way. So, within Luke's Gospel and in Acts, these are the way he uses these are the following titles and their the number of times they appear. So Christ the Lord is twice. The Lord Christ, just the once. The Christ, 17 times. The Christ of God, once. Christ, comma, a king, once. Christ, the chosen of God, just a single usage. The Christ, Son of God, exclamation point, just the one. 6 times he's referred to as Jesus Christ. Lord Jesus Christ is also 6 times. Jesus Christ of Nazareth, 2 times. And then this is what I'm like, this is what I was alluding to. Jesus as the Christ and Jesus is the Christ are used twice. It's almost Jesus the Christ, but it's not quite. So his most common form, as I just said, is the Christ or Jesus Christ. However, Jesus the Christ, other than in 837, we're as close as Jesus is the Christ and Jesus as the Christ. The exact phrase, in Acts 5:42 and 18:5 are the ones I referenced. So, like, that is the exact, basically the exact thing that Metzger said is not like a Lukish. It's there in those 2 instances. And I'll read you those verses. And daily in the temple and in every house, they did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ. So it's, meaning Jesus was being taught as the Messiah, as the Christ. That's Acts 5:42. And 18:5, when Silas and Timothy had come from Macedonia, Paul was compelled by the Spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus is the Christ. So you see, Metzger's right, technically. So it would appear that while Jesus the Christ is not common, Luke almost he's quoting twice. They're not his words again, so to be fair to Metzger, he is correct. Those verses, however, are not in any doubt or any, they're not up for question. That's what I'm looking for. Now I'm going to give you the arguments for the authenticity, because I have no strong feeling, because until a very good friend of mine asked me today, like, is to me kind of thing. I don't, So So let's see, right? The general argument when discussing any translation should be based on really just the one thing, like what best represents the original manuscripts. And that's discounting, of course, like oral tradition. But oral tradition at some point has to be written down because the Chinese whispers vibe as well. So we don't have the original. So that's kind of redundant. So scholars of manuscripts must use the existing ones and then piece together what they believe to most authentically or accurately convey or represent the originals. And that's not easy because there's nothing to check back to, which is why work is like done by highly educated professionals like so we're gonna let's just take a breather and look at the verse. So 36 is no discrepancy about this. As they went along the road, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, "Look, water, what prevents me from being baptized?" And now the verse in question, 37. And Philip said, "If you believe with all your heart, you may." And he answered and said, "I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God." So that's from the NASB, which does include it, as does the NKJV, the HCSB, KJV. Yeah, I get it right. Anyway, anywho, all the ones that I know of or that I had a minute to look at let you know something's missing. You know, footnotes are like a wonderful thing in printed Bibles or on the online ones if you just hover above it or whatever. So the KJV is based on later manuscript editions. We already kind of looked at that, except in the Latin, actually. Yeah, this verse is a source of debate, so I'm just giving a for and against, and then I'm out of it, mate. So as retained by the KJV and the NKJV, because they're differing even when they are extant, the versions of this verse. So this is what they say. And the eunuch said, "See, here is water. What hinders me from being baptized?" Verse 37. Then Philip said, "If you believe with all your heart, you may." And he answered and said, "I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God." And then verse 38. So he commanded the chariot to stand still, and both Philip and the eunuch went down to the water, and he baptized him. So you see, it does have a better narrative flow than if it's omitted, because it kind of it's a descriptor. It describes what is going down. It makes it more cohesive, more sensible as well. So the KJV onlyists, I don't know, like if you know any, they don't talk all funny or anything like that. They just like the KJV. Good luck to them. Like, it's not my favorite. So those people will point. They will point the omission out. Let's get that out of the way. And I don't want to be leading, but most likely claim that there's intent behind. That's the most terrible way, like behind Bible translators, like removing it, as it were, from the gospel. However, these don't tend to be Bible scholars saying these things. These are just people who have a preference and a love for the KJV because of the translation and transmission process. We've got thousands of manuscripts, and only some of them disagree with others, and that's across the board. I don't just mean for 837. Some of the manuscripts contain verse 37. Some do not. And of the oldest manuscripts, we have both Greek and Latin sources. So the oldest Greek do not contain verse 37. This is the argument for it, don't worry. The Latin manuscripts that contain the verse only date as early as the 6th. I've already outlined all this in the evidence against, as it were. So the passage doesn't have strong manuscript support in any early textual witness. If it was included in the Latin Vulgate, the 4th century, then it may be able to stand on its own, as it were. However, it was not in Jerome's Vulgate, which means that no Latin manuscript was known to the church in the 4th century of this verse, of course. So the case for including verse 37, even if we don't have it in our oldest and to all intents and purposes or supposed more accurate manuscript, and the early church fathers seem to believe, not all of them, they very rarely all believed anything at the same time altogether, which is a blessing for us because we get, great works that quote the Bible in support of their ideas. However, we've got a couple. So these church fathers that I'm going to quote, Irenaeus being one of them, seemed to believe that the at least say, I believe Jesus Christ to be the Son of God. His comments on Acts 8 with the following statement. Philip declared, that's in parentheses, just to make sense of the quote, that this was Jesus and the scripture was fulfilled in him, as did also the believing eunuch himself. And immediately requesting to be baptized, he said, direct quote, I believe Jesus Christ to be the Son of God. This man was also sent into the regions of Ethiopia to preach what he had himself believed, that there was one God preached by the prophets, but that the Son of this, parentheses, God, had already made, in brackets, his appearance in human nature, in brackets, secundum hominum, and had been led as a sheep to the slaughter, and all the other statements which the prophets made regarding him. And that's from Irenaeus' great book, Against Heresies. So Irenaeus lived earlier than the earliest manuscript. He lived from 130 to 202 CE, which means that he wrote approximately 100 years only after the writing of the Book of Acts itself. So his writings predate the known manuscripts, at least, and the same manuscripts that omit the verse. He's like coming in first, Irenaeus, as it were. So, of course, the argument against is solely textual, typed Greek manuscripts, etc. So another of the, like a church leader, a very early one, Cyprian, circa 200 to 258, so 3rd century, recounts the story of Philip and the eunuch to include the missing verse. In his account, also, the missing, I don't know how we want to call it, the verse is there. In the Acts of the Apostles, lo, that's old-fashioned, here is water. What is there which hinders me from being baptized? Then said Philip, if you believe with all your heart, you may. And that's from Cyprian. See, it's quite shorter than Irenaeus' quoting of the retelling of the story, as it were. And that's Cyprian, Treatise 12, Book 3. So, summarizing that briefly, so it appears that as early as the 2nd century, just not much time at all after Luke just stuck his quill down, 100 years is nothing in the Bible game, as it were, there was some tradition or text that was known to contain the verse. I don't believe for 1 second, I don't think anyone believes that Irenaeus or Cyprian is just pulling it out of the air and also happening to agree with one another. And I've said that there are 2 supporting church fathers. There are others, but not, of course, but they come much later, after the manuscripts, after the 6th century, after the ones including, I don't know, man, adding whatever way you're looking at it, the verse. Additionally, the Latin, the post-Vulgate, which includes the verse. So again, we saw that Jerome, it didn't include it, and then the later did. So that's like another attestation for it. Translated from the Latin, it says, Philip said, if you believe with all your heart, you may. And he replied, I believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. So that pertinent part is replicated, consistently. So the Latin tradition, I'm not used to talking about things that are not au fait with. The Latin tradition combines both versions of Acts 37 given by Irenaeus and Cyprian, blends them, uses them. And thus, therefore, even if we want to go that way, neither church father quoted the KJV. It's obvious. Or the version that ended up in the KJV, even though both quotes differed from the extant manuscripts on which those church fathers had them written or wrote them by their own hand. So the late Latin reading is the version that we have in the KJV. So Irenaeus and Cyprian aside, the post-Jerome Vulgate that we have is the one that directly fed into the KJV. So other church fathers do give similar accounts that include the confession, as it were, the verse, but they are much later than the early manuscripts, at least, which show the verse. They don't show I was going to say show it missing, but which have no verse there. And the only early patristic witnesses to Acts 8:37 are Irenaeus and Cyprian. I've got other stuff on it, but I feel like I've come to maybe like a small oasis of like not long Latin words. So I'm going to come back to the live chat, but there really is no point arguing with me if anyone wants to, because I have no strong feeling about its inclusion or otherwise. I'm not the guy. I'm the guy that the guy asked. And then I thought I'd make a video instead of, I should have, anywho. So I hope that wasn't too, like the test of, I was thinking it or discussing it the other day, the test of, thank you, Armor of God, the test of effortlessly explain it, like to show that you understand something, is that you should, I guess, be able to make it sound easier for other people. I wasn't going that way today. I usually do, like not in a patronizing way, just in a, it helps me to learn stuff if I can teach it, if that makes sense. But yeah, I could have done a bit. Literally, I was asked the question this afternoon, or like I was, yeah, it was, the claim was made this afternoon and stuff, so I didn't have much time, so I apologize for that. However, if you have, I was scared to say it, if you have further, because that's like Metzger and like a 4, as it were, a pro. There are other theories. Yeah, like I just chose 2 that sound, or that seemed academically valid. And of course, Metzger's opinion is like a pretty decent one to quote if you're going for textual criticism of Greek. I know that's the thing, Tyler. It is a lot of info. I might watch it back myself, like, and try and catch on to half of it. Sometimes you have to reread stuff a lot, and some, you know, the act of saying it out loud as well helps. Okay, so yeah, I think sorry, I will go. You won't be long. You stick to your KJVeth, mateth. I don't know how to speak KJV. It just, if you like Shakespeare, you're in luck. Kind of deal. There's nothing that, like I say, some, I won't say which ones, but some Bibles that I have like had the, you know, the pleasure. I mean, it's a privilege to have any Bible. Let's not muck about. Like if you're in China, any version of the Bible apart from the one that the CCP added, like I made Jesus a murderer, weirdos. Like yeah, is preferable. Even like the JW Bible is still, if you know to like just you know, take a couple of words in your mind that have been seriously added. Like yeah, even I saw Sam Shamoon prove the deity of Christ from the is it the New World Translation, the New Living Translation, the JW Bible, I'm going to call it. So yeah, they're all blessings. However, I've read some very modern, colloquial, like Americanized. Sorry, Americans. That I don't like it. I don't like them at all. But that's not to say, you know, the theology is the thing that counts, and no textual criticism or no variance between, you know, first iteration translations of the Bible, which is all of them, as far as I know. No, there are some little tribes who've got. Anyhow, the point is that none of them are theological. It's not like the Quran with all the different, you know, like none of them are theological. You know, that little A added, yeah, it could be seen as it, because it does make polytheism into a thing, but only linguistically. So I do realise that there's some people with strong opinions and all that. So you chit-chatting to each other. If you have any questions, I would welcome questions not on this subject also, because I feel like I don't know how far I can take you with that. Actually, I did do a little short like textual criticism thing. So any questions? I won't be offended if you don't have any. If you all want to like do some cuddles and say goodbye now, but I don't mean with me, I mean with each other, or I don't know. I'm not starting up a hug station over here. Random guy, do you mean you've got a question for me? If you have, I'd love to hear it. Vil, yeah, so villainous, just for anyone who is like, if you watch this before the live chat is processed, villainous is saying in our walk, we do need to grow out of kiddie Bibles, i.e. good news, he says, etc. I can see the validity to that, although like my preferred translation is somewhat at odds with my chart. Like I'm not talking about kiddie Bibles, but the version of the Bible that my favorite verses are like in my heart from is not what I see in my more literal, like, I don't want to say authentic, but like, like, where you are with the language. Sometimes it doesn't flow as eloquently, and it's a bit jarring when it's like your actual favorite verse, although I've got many. But yeah, if you can, like, use the brain that God gave you. What's the harm? Ask for the Holy Spirit of discernment. Like, if it's literally, I mean, it could lead to salvation, but to be a committed Muslim, for example, and to know the Bible inside out avails you nothing. So yeah, random guy. Do I believe the Alexandrian or Byzantine Greek manuscripts? What would your argument be against them? This is not my forte. I don't. I can't think off the top of my head where I've had any argumentation where they were like critiqued, but that doesn't mean obviously it's not there. It just means that I haven't had to go into that, because like I say, this Acts 8:37 jazz was just like put on my lap this afternoon. But yeah, KJV hasn't ever really been my favoured translation, but not because of textual criticism, more so because I feel that already the lingo that Christians use, that we know what we're talking about, as it were, can already be off-putting. And I was saying to my friend this afternoon that today's teenagers, it seems, I feel old even saying that phrase, don't even speak English, let alone 17th century, whither thou goest, like good morrow, kind sir, prithee thee, tell me, like that kind of Shakespeare, King Jamesy jazz. So I feel like if there's a way of authentically, because we don't translate from the King James to the next one, to the next one, to the next one, for anyone who's unaware, it goes from the Greek to the English, or from the Latin to the English. The Latin is like a grey area because it wasn't written originally like that. But the Hebrew and the Greek, boom, Bob's your uncle, there it is in English, that kind of deal. Or it goes from solely Greek because of the Septuagint, like the translation. There. Martin, I'll swallow that one and wipe your mouth because it's you saying it. If you are talking to me, thank you. I'm going to invest in some skin cream. Yeah, Basil gets making the point that regardless of, I'm not going to speak for him, but my point then is, in terms of Erasmus, who was like a very intelligent man, it's not what is extant, it's what he had access to, So some of the minuscules do have it as marginalia. However, he only had access to one of those, as opposed to I guess the argument is, to the many other manuscripts he had access to that did not include it. So he's gone for not the majority consensus, as it were, of the texts. Cherokee is pointing out there is a lot of Greek fragmentary also manuscripts, 5,800 more in the Coptic, other languages. Coptic, just Arabic. Yeah, there is no Egyptian language. repent. That's such an odd. I'm not standing. I don't do delivery. So it's K, but you're very welcome, random guy. Robin Hood. I just don't know. Like, I'm not. Yep, I had to think about that. See if any nights out sprang up in my mind that I may not remember clearly. But no, I've never been a highway robber. So I don't know if that's like a slang / colloquial for London. But Robin Hood wasn't from London. He was from Sherwood Forest, Nottingham, rings a bell. And fictional also, of course, because that, yeah. Sorry, my brain just started playing Bryan Adams. That. Oh, let's get off of that. Oh, no worries. Random guy. Any other questions that don't set me off rallying on such a, like, I do a mean tangent? And that's not a drink. That's it means like a veer off on branches. Vil, funny you should say that, my little love. I've got one. Yeah, I've got a London translation behind me. Also, I used to know a teacher who did a Cockney translation of the Bible, exactly as you say. I should get a copy. I should find that. Yeah. So I've got like more of a I don't even want to try and no. I've got more of a young people's like road chat one, but I like my one. Over 9,000 ancient manuscripts, Cherokee tells us, because she's a little love, in other ancient languages, and by some counts, there are over 24,000. The New Testament is the most preserved and most reliable of the ancient world. It's also the most critiqued. It's the the entirety of the Bible. I've said it before, say it again. It's the best-selling book ever, and it's still the best-selling book, and it's also, don't know why I get like a weird feeling of pride. It's so bizarre. It's the most stolen book as well. Not from people, like shoplifted book, not justifying it. But at least if they steal it, they have the means to find out how to get forgiven. Not only for that, for all the rest of the shenanigans that they may have been up to, like the rest of us. So yeah, it's not like, don't ever feel like all that we know of, all Bible criticism and anything to do with any verse that's added in some, because there are other instances of verses that are included in some translations or not. It will directly go back to the manuscript used, obviously, for the translation, like notwithstanding scribes. There's one, I think it's in Ireland. The marginalia is just such a funny, it's the man's just written in the corner, like, I have a banging hangover, like in medieval type language, and that just cracks me up, like, because he's writing it probably for the next scribe who's coming along, who's his pal. But yeah, it's funny. I see that riddle me this, and you've been out-riddled, you've been answered. That guy Nick. Yeah. D-Day, there's just far too much. Like Jesus's teachings of the Spirit, like, maybe I'll do a bit, but it's not like a couple of sentence answers. A couple of sentences answer, even. I know, villainous. I know. I think Terry Pratchett is the most shoplifted author in Britain, or he was when he was alive. I don't know why I've got the top shoplifting stats for literary floating around in my brain. Oh, somebody's phoning me. Shoot. All right, I'm going to have to end this. Sorry, it's important. All right. Lots of love, everyone. And I'll see you later.